A young man climbs onto a burning tank destroyer, firing a machine gun at hundreds of enemy soldiers. That same man later starred in westerns seen by millions. His name? Audie Murphy. And he's only the beginning. Audie Murphy, America's deadliest soldier. He didn't look the part. Audie Murphy was 5.5 feet tall, barely 110 pounds when he first tried to enlist. The Marines turned him away. The paratroopers turned him away. Even the Navy refused him, but the Army finally said yes in June 1942, and that decision would put the most unlikely soldier on the path to becoming the deadliest of World War II. Murphy was sent to North Africa, then Sicily, then Italy. He fought through malaria, hunger, and exhaustion, yet kept moving forward. In France, he took command when officers fell, directing fire with precision that stunned older soldiers. He carried a carbine, but his marksmanship made every bullet count. His rise from farm boy to leader wasn't scripted. It was earned in mud, blood, and fire. The numbers alone still shock military historians. 241 confirmed enemy soldiers killed by Murphy himself, with dozens more likely in group combat. He received every major U.S. Combat Award, the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts. He also received honors from France and Belgium, proof that even allies recognized his unmatched effectiveness. One story became legend. In January 1945, near Holtzwihr, France, Murphy ordered his men to retreat while he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer. Flames were already licking at the vehicle's sides, but its .50 caliber machine gun still worked. Alone, he fired at waves of German infantry, holding them off for an hour. By the time he finally climbed down, wounded and exhausted, nearly 50 enemy soldiers had been killed or injured. His unit survived because of that single stand. Hollywood couldn't have invented a more dramatic scene. In fact, it became the reason Murphy's face appeared on the cover of Life magazine. Actor James Cagney saw it and invited him to Los Angeles. Murphy resisted at first, but the studios knew his war record was more than a headline, but a box office draw. Universal built him into a Western star, though even his toughest roles never matched what he had actually done in Europe. Charles Bronson, Tail Gunner Survival. Before he became Hollywood's tough guy, Charles Bronson was a young man from Pennsylvania coal country. Born Charles Baczynski, he grew up poor, speaking little English until his teens. In 1943, at 21, he was drafted into the U.S. Army Air Forces. That's where his hard stare was forged, inside the cramped tail of a B-29 bomber. Tail gunners had one of the most dangerous jobs in the air. Positioned alone at the very back of the plane, they were the first target for enemy fighters and had nowhere to hide. Bronson manned twin, but .50 caliber machine guns tasked with keeping German aircraft from shooting his bomber out of the sky. The casualty rate for bomber crews was staggering. Some estimates put survival odds at less than 50% once a squadron went into combat. Bronson flew 25 missions. Each mission meant hours in freezing, high-altitude air, with bullets and cannon fire tearing past his turret. He saw fellow bombers around him explode mid-air, crews gone in seconds. Every time he strapped into that turret, he knew it could be his last flight. After the war ended, Bronson returned home with his Air Medal, recognizing his courage and skill in combat. He first worked in mines, just like his father, before deciding to use the GI Bill to study art. That move eventually led him to an acting career. The quiet intensity he carried into roles wasn't manufactured. When he glared into a camera, audiences felt it because he had already stared down death at 20,000 feet. Bronson didn't brag about those missions. Interviewers sometimes pushed him to talk about the war, but he kept his answers brief. "I suppose I look like a tough customer," he once said. "But it's not something I put on for the camera. When you've seen real violence up close, it stays with you." That was as close as he came to admitting that the war lived inside him. Directors noticed. Sergio Leone cast him in Once Upon a Time in the West because, as he said, Bronson had a face that looks like it has experienced everything. Lee Marvin, Marine Scout Sniper. Long before Point Blank or The Dirty Dozen, he was a Marine Scout sniper in the Pacific. He enlisted in August 1942, leaving behind prep school and odd jobs. By 1944, he was in Saipan with the 4th Marine Division, armed with a rifle and trained to take lives with precision. The Battle of Saipan was one of the bloodiest campaigns in the Pacific. Japanese forces fought to the last man, often in hand-to-hand combat. Marvin was in the thick of it, using sniper tactics in jungle terrain where visibility was short and danger constant. His unit advanced under heavy fire, moving from beaches littered with bodies to hills defended with machine guns. During one attack, Marvin was hit by enemy fire. A burst from a machine gun tore into his lower back and buttocks, shattering part of his sciatic nerve. The wound nearly killed him and left him hospitalized for over a year. For that injury, he received the Purple Heart. He was eventually discharged as a private first class, though he had risen to corporal before his injury. Unlike many veterans, Marvin didn't hide his experience. He admitted more than once that his war scars shaped who he was. "Once you've been shot at, everything else is small stuff," he said. Directors who worked with him noticed the authenticity. John Borman, who directed Point Blank, recalled that Marvin wasn't acting in violent scenes. He was remembering. The sniper's gaze never left him. That 1,000-yard stare, the quiet menace he projected on screen, was the real thing. He had seen chaos close up, and audiences sensed it. His performances carried a stripped-down honesty because he knew what it felt like to fight, bleed, and survive. When Marvin won the Academy Award for Cat Ballou in 1965, critics called his performance both comic and chilling. James Stewart, Bomber Command Missions. He was already a household name when war broke out. By 1941, he had starred in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and The Philadelphia Story. Hollywood assumed he'd stay home, maybe entertain the troops. Stewart had other plans. Just after Pearl Harbor, he became the first major actor to enlist, even though he was slightly over the age limit. At first, the Army tried to keep him stateside. He made training films and served in non-combat roles. Stewart pushed back, requesting assignment after assignment until he was cleared for combat duty. By 1943, he was flying B-24 Liberators with the 445th Bombardment Group. These weren't safe missions. Stewart commanded bombing runs over Nazi Germany, leading squadrons of aircraft loaded with thousands of pounds of explosives. He logged at least 20 official combat missions, though some historians believe the number was closer to 25. Strategic bombing was lethal work. Crews faced flak, freezing temperatures, and German fighters. Each run meant the destruction of enemy infrastructure, but also countless deaths on the ground. His leadership didn't go unnoticed. Stewart rose from private to colonel during the war, one of the fastest climbs for any officer. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and later, France awarded him the Croix de Guerre. Few actors in Hollywood history wore that many combat decorations. After 1945, Stewart remained in the Air Force Reserve, eventually reaching Brigadier General in 1959, the highest rank ever achieved by a major Hollywood star. Yet, despite his stature, he rarely spoke about combat. Friends said he carried the weight quietly. He avoided war movies for years, turning instead to westerns and thrillers. Those who worked with him noticed a change. Director Anthony Mann said Stewart's post-war performances had a darkness and intensity that wasn't there before. Viewers felt it too. Films like Winchester 73 and Hitchcock's Vertigo showed a man who could channel obsession, fear, and resilience in ways that felt lived in. Neville Brand, Decorated Infantry Sergeant. The Battle of the Bulge chewed up entire divisions. Among the men fighting through snow and shell fire was a young infantry sergeant who would later terrify movie audiences. Neville Brand wasn't cast for toughness. He earned it in Europe before ever stepping in front of a camera. Brand enlisted in 1941, months before Pearl Harbor. Assigned to the 331st Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Division, He saw some of the most grueling combat of the war. His unit landed in France not long after D-Day and pushed into Germany against fanatical resistance. As an infantryman, Brand's job was direct and lethal. He fought house to house, field to field, often within yards of enemy soldiers. His actions at the Bulge brought him a Silver Star, one of the military's highest awards for gallantry. The citation praised him for charging through enemy fire to knock out a machine gun position, saving fellow soldiers pinned down in the attack. He didn't escape unscathed. Brand was wounded in action and carried the scars for the rest of his life. By the end of the war, he had accumulated 10 separate combat decorations, including the Purple Heart, Combat Infantryman Badge, and the World War II Victory Medal. Military records later ranked him as the 4th most decorated American soldier to become a Hollywood actor, behind only Audie Murphy, Charles Durning, and a handful of others. After the war, Brand drifted toward theater and eventually to Hollywood. Casting directors took one look at his rugged face and slashing grin and pegged him as a villain. What audiences didn't know was that his portrayals of gangsters and killers weren't just performance. There was an edge of authenticity that came from surviving the Ardennes and seeing men fall around him. He occasionally admitted as much. "After you face death," he told one interviewer, "pretending to be scared in front of a camera doesn't seem like much of a challenge." Sterling Hayden, OSS Commando Operations. Long before he became a film noir icon, Sterling Hayden was dropping into enemy territory under a false name. His Hollywood career paused almost as soon as it began when he enlisted in the Marines in 1942. It didn't take long for the Office of Strategic Services, the wartime predecessor of the CIA, to notice his unusual skill set. Hayden had already logged years at sea as a merchant marine, giving him navigation skills few recruits possessed. That made him a perfect fit for covert missions in the Balkans. Under the alias John Hamilton, he was trained in parachuting, demolitions, and clandestine communications. Unlike regular soldiers, OSS operatives operated outside normal battle lines. Capture meant torture and execution, not prisoner of war treatment. By 1944, Hayden was parachuting into Yugoslavia, where he coordinated weapons drops and advised partisan fighters under Marshal Tito. He also slipped into northern Italy to run operations against German supply lines. Each mission demanded stealth and absolute trust in men he barely knew. He survived firefights, ambushes, and endless nights in hostile territory. For his service, he received the Silver Star and commendations from both the United States and Yugoslavia. Hollywood barely acknowledged this chapter of his life when he returned after the war. Instead, audiences saw him in roles like The Asphalt Jungle and The Killing. The quiet menace, the watchful eyes, the sense that he knew more than he was saying, those weren't acting tricks. They came from a man who had spent years carrying false papers and relying on instinct to stay alive. Hayden eventually wrote about his wartime experience in his autobiography, Wanderer, where he admitted the work left him conflicted. He admired the Yugoslav partisans and even flirted with communist politics back home, choices that later drew scrutiny during the Red Scare. But in the field, he never doubted the stakes. Weapons, shipments he coordinated were used in battles that shaped the outcome of the war in southern Europe. Robert Ryan, Marine Drill Instructor. Hundreds of Marines went into the Pacific war zones tougher because Robert Ryan had trained them first. When the U.S. entered World War II, Ryan joined the Marine Corps and was assigned to Camp Pendleton. His duty wasn't entertainment. It was turning raw recruits into combat-ready fighters. Drill instructors were responsible for more than marching cadence. Ryan drilled men in marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and survival tactics. Every recruit who passed through his unit had to learn to shoot straight, move under fire, and maintain discipline under chaos. His job was to harden them for Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan, where mistakes meant death. Ryan's own personality fit the role. Tall, commanding, and intense, he delivered instructions with an authority that stuck. Fellow Marines remembered him as strict but effective. He didn't see overseas combat, but the men he trained did, carrying the lessons of Camp Pendleton into the fiercest battles of the Pacific. After the war, Ryan stepped back into civilian life and pursued acting. What he carried with him was an understanding of violence as a system, not an impulse. That awareness showed up in films like The Setup and Bad Day at Black Rock. His villains weren't cartoonish, they were grounded, intelligent, and frighteningly believable. Directors noticed. Nicholas Ray, who cast Ryan in On Dangerous Ground, said the actor had a way of showing brutality as thought out, not random. That was the mindset of someone who had spent years training others in calculated force. Even when Ryan played racists or thugs, there was always a sense that he knew exactly why the character acted that way. Later in his career, directors like Anthony Mann and Sam Peckinpah tapped into Ryan's military background to lend realism to war films. On set, he sometimes advised on the small details of soldier behavior, how squads moved, how orders were given, how men reacted under fire. That precision came from memory, not guesswork. Telly Savalas, wounded in Pacific combat. Purple Hearts aren't handed out for close calls. Telly Savalas earned his during World War II, long before he held a lollipop as Kojak. He joined the Army in 1941 and was placed in Company C of the 12th Medical Training Battalion. That posting involved support duty at Camp Pickett, Virginia, where he trained medical personnel. Records confirm he was wounded in action. The Army awarded him the Purple Heart, a medal reserved for those actually struck in battle. He never offered the blow-by-blow publicly, keeping the circumstances private even when asked in interviews decades later. Like many veterans of World War II, he carried the memories without sharing them. The islands where he fought were some of the harshest environments American troops faced. Fighting was close, brutal, and relentless. Servicemen lived with heat, insects, and disease as much as they lived with the constant threat of ambush. Surviving it left a mark. After the war, Savalas stayed quiet about the combat but carried himself with authority on screen. When he played soldiers in The Dirty Dozen or detectives on television, the toughness wasn't an act. Director Robert Aldrich said casting him was easy. Telly didn't need to fake toughness or authority. When he gave an order, you believed it because he had lived it. His acting style reflected that background. He moved with economy, wasted no words, and projected calm menace. Those qualities made him stand out in ensemble films and later defined his television persona as Kojak. That trademark bald head and casual catchphrases softened him, but audiences always sensed the steel underneath. Even when fame arrived, Savalas kept his combat years mostly off the record. Only late in life did he briefly acknowledge that the Purple Heart represented more than a medal. He chose not to relive those moments for public consumption. Kirk Douglas, Navy anti-submarine duty. Depth charges thundered across the Pacific while Kirk Douglas served as a naval officer. Before Hollywood crowned him a leading man, he wore headphones and relayed commands aboard a submarine chaser. Douglas enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1941, just before Pearl Harbor. Assigned to the PC-1139, a wooden-hulled patrol craft, he worked as a communications officer. The ship's mission was anti-submarine warfare. Crews hunted Japanese subs using sonar and deployed depth charges designed to crush enemy vessels deep below. It was dangerous work. Subchasers were small, often just over 170 feet long, and vulnerable to torpedoes. They carried crews of around 60, all of whom knew that a single hit could sink them in minutes. Long patrols kept them on edge, listening for faint sonar echoes that might signal a lurking submarine. Douglas spent nearly 3 years in this environment, logging missions that put him within striking distance of Japanese forces. Official Navy records confirm his service ended with an honorable discharge in 1944, when he sustained injuries from an accidental depth charge explosion during training. He later received disability benefits for the damage to his hearing. Back home, he returned to acting, bringing with him a new intensity. Directors noticed how he threw his body into performances, whether in Champion or Ace in the Hole. Billy Wilder once remarked that Douglas understood what it meant to put your body on the line, a quality rare in young actors. That awareness came from more than athletic training. It came from standing on a small deck in the Pacific, bracing against the concussion of explosives, and wondering if the sonar contact below would fire back. Discipline, teamwork, and constant readiness had been drilled into him at sea, and they bled into his screen persona. Douglas rarely spoke at length about his naval service. In his autobiography, The Ragman's Son, he mentioned it briefly as part of his climb from poverty to Hollywood success. Clint Eastwood survived Pacific plane crash. Not every brush with death came from combat. For Clint Eastwood, it came from the Pacific Ocean when a Navy plane went down off the California coast. Drafted in 1951 during the Korean War, Eastwood was assigned to Fort Ord as a swimming instructor. His military role kept him stateside, training recruits in water survival. But one flight changed everything. While hitching a ride aboard a Navy AD, one Sky Raider, the aircraft ran out of fuel near Point Reyes. With no time for options, the pilot ditched into the sea. The crash threw both men into frigid waters. Survival depended on strength and endurance, not weapons. Eastwood and the pilot faced miles of open ocean, strong currents, and the cold shock that could sap energy in minutes. Using the same skills he taught recruits, Eastwood swam more than 3 miles to shore. It took hours before he finally dragged himself onto land, exhausted but alive. He later described the ordeal in blunt terms. No life raft, no rescue in sight, just the need to keep swimming. For anyone else, the incident could have ended in silence. For Eastwood, it became part of the quiet toughness he carried into his career. Unlike decorated combat veterans of his era, Eastwood's military record held no battle stars. But the crash gave him something different, a first-hand lesson in endurance and survival. Directors who worked with him noticed that stripped-down realism. Don Siegel, who directed Dirty Harry, once said Eastwood had a natural understanding of how men react in life-threatening situations. That came from the Pacific, not a soundstage. His acting style mirrored the survival swim, efficient, economical, no wasted movement. Whether in A Fistful of Dollars or Unforgiven, he projected a calm that suggested danger wasn't hypothetical. It was lived experience. Eastwood never dramatized the crash for publicity. He spoke about it only when asked, always with understatement, but the perspective shaped him. Facing death in open water at 21 gave him a yardstick for fear. It wasn't bravado, it was the knowledge that panic kills faster than the sea. That lesson became the backbone of his screen persona, a man who says little, moves with purpose, and survives when others can't. One was accused of sleeping with an entire football team, another got caught broadcasting bedroom footage at house parties, and yet another, she may have flirted her way into the Church of Satan. This is the Hollywood you were never meant to see. Clara Bow's scandalous engagements. She was Hollywood's first real it girl, and by the late 1920s, she was everywhere, magazines, movies, and scandal sheets. What made her stand out wasn't just her screen presence, it was how she lived, loudly. Between 1927 and 1929, Clara racked up a string of what the press called engagements. One month, she was linked to cowboy star Rex Bell. The next, to director Victor Fleming. By year's end, Gary Cooper and Gilbert Roland were also thrown into the mix, but none of these supposed fiancés made it to the altar. For Clara, the word engaged was more like interested, for now. The most explosive scandal hit in 1928. Clara became close to her doctor, too close. His wife didn't take it lightly. She filed for divorce, accusing Clara of alienating affection and dragging her name straight into court. Newspapers went wild. Headlines painted Bow as a homewrecker. Fans were stunned, but ticket sales kept climbing. In 1931, things spiraled again. Clara's former secretary, Daisy DeVoe, tried to blackmail her. She was later arrested and charged with theft, but not before leaking private letters and rumors to the press. The wildest story claimed Clara slept with the entire USC football team. Bow called it ridiculous, and no proof ever turned up, but the damage was done. Radio hosts and columnists couldn't stop talking about her. What made Clara so vulgar in the eyes of her era wasn't anything she said, it was how she acted. She wore what she wanted, swore in interviews, and laughed off public shame. In a time when studios wanted stars to act proper, Clara rolled her eyes and lit another cigarette. She didn't follow Hollywood's rules. She didn't ask for forgiveness. And she never toned it down. That attitude made her a scandal magnet and a symbol of the flapper age. Tallulah Bankhead's provocative remarks. She didn't just break the rules, but ran them over in heels. By the early 1930s, she had carved out a reputation in Hollywood and Broadway as someone who said exactly what she wanted, no matter who was listening. In 1932, reporters asked her why she took a small role in Devil in the Deep. Her answer? Tiff. That divine Gary Cooper. That was the exact quote minus the bleep. It shocked even the most jaded gossip writers. The press tried to clean it up, but the damage or the impact was already made. Tallulah didn't care. She called herself pure as the driven slush and often described her sex life as legion. At parties, she drank hard, smoked harder, and joked about sleeping with both men and women. One reporter noted she had a voice soaked in gin and sex, and audiences loved her for it. Her marriage in 1933 to actor John Emery was short, chaotic, and mostly forgotten. When asked about it years later, Tallulah dismissed it as a minor mistake, saying she was more interested in people than partnerships. Hollywood wasn't sure what to make of her. Studios tried to market her as a glamorous leading lady, but she refused to play nice. She ignored dress codes, skipped studio publicity events, and once showed up to a dinner party with no underwear on purpose. Friends said she was wild but generous. Enemies called her vulgar and out of control. Either way, no one denied she was unforgettable. She lit up rooms with a mix of charm, wit, and just enough danger to make people nervous. When asked about the censorship rules tightening Hollywood scripts in the mid-1930s, Tallulah famously said, "I can't read that Hays Code crap. I just act the way I like, and let the bastards worry about the rest." She didn't last long in big studio films, but on stage and in gossip columns, she stayed a star. Joan Crawford's alleged stag film. Before she became a Hollywood powerhouse, she was just Lucille LeSueur, an ambitious young dancer trying to break into pictures. And according to decades of whispers, that early climb included one dirty secret MGM spent years trying to bury. The story goes like this. Around 1925, before signing with any major studio, Crawford allegedly appeared in a stag film, a silent adult reel passed around at industry parties. The title was never confirmed, but rumors claimed it involved two women and was filmed in Los Angeles. At the time, she was broke, unknown, and desperate for exposure. By 1930, Crawford's star had risen fast. She'd scored leads in Our Dancing Daughters and Untamed, and MGM saw her as the future. That's when the rumors surged. Several gossip columns hinted that one of Hollywood's biggest new stars had a past indiscretion on film. Studio chief Louis B. Mayer reportedly moved fast. According to later biographies and FBI-adjacent documents, MGM paid upwards to locate and destroy all known copies. Crawford denied everything. In interviews, she called it a smear campaign. "I was never in any film like that," she told Photoplay in 1932. People love to invent stories about girls who succeed. But that didn't stop the speculation. Her ex-husbands, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Francho Tone, never confirmed anything publicly, but both were asked about it during their divorces. The story lingered. By the 1950s, it became an underground Hollywood myth, repeated in whispers by industry insiders and half-confirmed in unauthorized biographies. One tabloid even claimed to have stills from the original reel, though nothing was ever proven. Crawford never broke character. She kept her image sharp, her words clipped, and her past locked behind her eyes. But those old rumors stuck around, quietly circling a woman who refused to ever let them land. Lupe Velez's violent jealousy. She wasn't just a firecracker on screen, she was one in real life. Nicknamed the Mexican Spitfire, she was known for playing bold, brash women. Off camera, she lived up to that image in ways that left even her friends stunned. In 1934, she was dating Gary Cooper. Things were intense from the start. When she discovered he was secretly seeing Marlene Dietrich, she lost it. According to accounts from Cooper's valet and later biographers, Lupe chased him through his own house armed with a pistol. Stories say he jumped out a window to get away. She then stormed off and threatened to cut out Dietrich's eyes. Her love life stayed explosive. She had public relationships with Clark Gable, Charlie Chaplin, and Errol Flynn. But Lupe didn't try to hide anything. She'd speak openly about her lovers in interviews, often using their names to stir the pot. When reporters asked if she was serious with Chaplin, she said, "Only when I'm bored." That kind of comment made headlines and enemies. Another rumor circulated on one film set in 1935. She reportedly halted production for hours after accusing a co-star of flirting with her man. She screamed, cursed, and knocked over props before storming off. The director, afraid she'd quit, waited for her to cool down before rolling cameras again. Studios loved her draw at the box office, but dreaded her outbursts behind the scenes. Lupe's temper wasn't limited to romantic jealousy. Accounts said she once slapped a columnist in public for writing that her English was too broken for radio. When asked if she regretted it, she shrugged and said, "He's lucky I didn't punch him. Too cruel to be true." The public couldn't get enough. Audiences lined up for her films, not just for her comedy, but because they knew Lupe was real. Too real, some said. While other actresses polished their image, Lupe poured tequila, threw shoes, and said exactly what she thought. She wasn't vulgar because she cursed. She was vulgar because she didn't care who heard it, and in an industry built on masks, that made her dangerous. Marlene Dietrich's bisexual affairs. She had a way of walking into a room and owning it. By the late 1930s, she was a major star with a husky voice, a sharp jawline, and a reputation that didn't stop at the screen. In 1937, Hollywood insiders buzzed about her affair with Joan Crawford. While most stars hid same-sex relationships, Dietrich didn't seem to care who knew. According to film historian Kenneth Anger and several Crawford biographers, the two had a brief, intense connection that was quickly swept under the rug by studio handlers. But that was just one chapter. Dietrich's dating history read like a who's who of Hollywood, both men and women. She had flings with John Gilbert, Maurice Chevalier, and Eric Maria Remarque, but it was her romantic links to actresses like Claudette Colbert and Dolores Del Rio that raised eyebrows. At a 1938 Beverly Hills party, Dietrich kissed a woman full on the lips while surrounded by guests. People gasped. Marlene laughed. She wore men's suits to events, called herself sexless, and once told a reporter, "I dress for myself, not for men." When the Hays Code tightened rules around sexuality in film, she adjusted her on-screen roles, but her private life stayed as provocative as ever. FBI files from the early 1940s labeled Dietrich's behavior subversive. They monitored her social circle and tracked her travels, especially during World War II when she toured with the USO. Her refusal to fit the mold of a proper leading lady made her both admired and feared. Dietrich never confirmed anything. When asked about her rumored lovers, she said, "I never talk about my personal life. It's the only thing I have." Still, the rumors kept spreading because, unlike most actresses of her time, she gave people a reason to believe them. She didn't just cross lines, she erased them, quietly, confidently, and with a smile. Vivien Leigh's adulterous pursuit. She wasn't just chasing roles, she was chasing Laurence Olivier. By 1939, she was already a rising star, and he was a respected stage actor. The only problem? Olivier was married, and his wife, actress Jill Esmond, was expecting their child. Leigh didn't hold back. Anecdotes circulated that she followed Olivier to Capri while he was filming Q Planes, staying in a villa nearby. Friends said she'd find ways to accidentally bump into him around town. The two began spending long evenings together, and before long, gossip made its way back to London. Esmond, still pregnant, was blindsided. When Olivier returned home, the affair didn't end. In fact, it became more visible. At the 1939 premiere of Fire Over England, Lee and Olivier arrived hand in hand, smiling for the cameras like they had nothing to hide. The press took notice, and the headlines were brutal. Esmond was painted as the wronged wife. Lee was labeled a homewrecker. Olivier eventually filed for divorce, and the British tabloids had a field day. Leigh's reputation took a hit, especially with female fans who had admired her early work. In interviews, she showed little regret. She simply said she loved Olivier and wouldn't apologize for it. Her own marriage to actor Lee Holman was already falling apart, but it wasn't just infidelity that drew public scorn, it was the way she flaunted it. In a conservative pre-war Britain, discretion was expected. Lee chose defiance. Even after their marriage in 1940, people didn't forget how it began. The Catholic Church in England refused to bless the union. Columnists referred to her as the Scarlet Woman, and studio executives worried the scandal would hurt her marketability in America. It didn't plate it. That same year, she was cast as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, a role that seemed to mirror her real-life drama. She played it perfectly and won the Oscar. But behind the scenes, the judgment never quite faded. Lee's pursuit of Olivier had rewritten the rules of star behavior, not because of what she did, but because she didn't try to hide it. In a world obsessed with image, Vivien Leigh let everyone see the mess and still walked away with the part of a lifetime. Jayne Mansfield's Satanic Tease. She knew how to work a headline. In the mid-1960s, her film career was fading, but her talent for stirring controversy was still sharp. That's when she crossed paths with Anton LaVey, the black-cloaked founder of the Church of Satan. In 1966, Mansfield showed up at LaVey's San Francisco Black House in a pink convertible. Photos from the visit show her grinning beside LaVey's pet leopard while he stood solemnly with a shaved head and inverted cross. Reporters called it a publicity stunt. LaVey, never one to shy away from attention, claimed it was more than that. Their connection got stranger. LaVey's publicist later revealed that Mansfield would call him late at night, flirt heavily over the phone, then hang up laughing while her friends giggled in the background. She reportedly signed a membership certificate for the church, which LaVey kept framed in his home. Whether she meant it as a joke or a jab is still unclear. In private, Jayne mocked LaVey's theatrics, calling him theatrical but harmless. But her link to the Satanic Church made headlines around the world. Her manager warned her to cut it off. She didn't. In 1967, things turned darker. After an argument between LaVey and Mansfield's boyfriend Sam Brody, LaVey supposedly told people he had placed a curse on Brody. Later that year, Jayne and Brody died in a horrific car crash on a Louisiana highway. Jayne died of head injuries. 3 of her children were in the back seat, all of whom survived. LaVey fueled the rumors after her death, claiming he had warned her to stay away from Brody. He never directly took credit, but the idea of a satanic curse followed Mansfield's legacy for years. Tabloids ran with it, blending fact with fiction, and audiences couldn't look away. Jayne never clarified her connection to LaVey before her death. Whether she believed any of it or just used it to stay in the spotlight is still debated. But the image of a blonde bombshell wrapped in occult imagery was too strong to forget. Even in death, Mansfield kept people talking. That was always part of the plan. Elizabeth Taylor's Fisher Affair. By 1958, she was already famous for 2 things, her movies and her love life. But the scandal that defined her came after the sudden death of her 3rd husband, producer Mike Todd. Just weeks later, she started leaning on singer Eddie Fisher for comfort. He was married to her best friend, Debbie Reynolds. The affair moved fast. Fisher began staying overnight. Paparazzi caught him leaving Taylor's house early in the morning, sparking instant tabloid frenzy. Reynolds had no idea until reporters showed her the photos. The betrayal shocked Hollywood. public sympathy for Taylor quickly turned into outrage. When Fisher left Reynolds to be with Elizabeth, headlines exploded. Life, Time, and the New York Post all ran front-page coverage. Reynolds, heartbroken, played the victim with grace. Taylor, on the other hand, didn't bother defending herself. When asked in 1959 if she felt guilty, she told a reporter, "Debbie was never my close friend, and Eddie's boring." That quote stuck. So did the label the press gave her, homewrecker. Headlines ran wild, and church groups publicly condemned her behavior as immoral. MGM was swamped with angry letters. Some fans called for a boycott. Others canceled fan club memberships. Studios panicked. MGM had just cast Taylor in Suddenly last summer. Executives worried the scandal would tank the film. Instead, it soared. The controversy only made her more famous. Taylor and Fisher married in 1959. It didn't last. Within a few years, she left him for Richard Burton, igniting an even bigger scandal. But the Fisher affair remained a turning point. Reporters tried to trip her up, but Taylor stood firm. "I'm not a bad woman," she said. "I just love too much." Whether people believed her or not didn't seem to matter. The public couldn't stop watching. What made this scandal different was that Taylor didn't lose anything. Not roles, not status. She walked through the fire with diamonds on and came out shining. That, more than anything, is what made Hollywood call her dangerous. Diana Dore's sex parties. She was often called the British Marilyn Monroe, but she didn't just mimic the look, she went further. By the late 1950s, Dores had made a name for herself in the UK and Hollywood, not just for her roles, but for what happened behind closed doors at her home in Berkshire. In 1959, Dores and her husband, actor Dennis Hamilton, hosted parties at their mansion, Orchard Manor. To guests, they seemed like glamorous get-togethers. But many left shocked. Reports surfaced that the couple installed a hidden camera system, broadcasting live footage from upstairs bedrooms into the lounge below. Some guests were unaware they were being filmed. Attendees claimed Dores encouraged a no-rules atmosphere, public nudity, partner swapping, and open flirtation. One former friend told a British tabloid that no one left without seeing something shocking. Several guests said they were invited under normal pretenses, only to find themselves in a voyeuristic circus. When journalists caught wind, Dores didn't deny it. Instead, she brushed it off as harmless fun. In interviews, she laughed at the outrage, saying, "So what if we enjoy life a little differently?" Her nonchalant attitude made things worse. Headlines branded her the Wicked Lady. Conservative papers called her a threat to British morals. The fallout hit fast. Some producers pulled offers. Her image in America took a hit. But Dores didn't stop. Even after Hamilton's sudden death in 1959, the stories kept coming. Nothing was ever proven, but whispers followed her for years. Unlike most actresses, Dores didn't beg for redemption. She doubled down. "People can think what they like," she told the Daily Mirror. "I've never been boring." That was true. Dores blurred the line between scandal and performance, living her life as if the cameras were always rolling, even when they actually were. While others clung to studio-crafted reputations, she built hers on shock value, then dared anyone to look away. In the end, it wasn't the films that made her unforgettable. It was the parties no one could stop talking about. Marilyn Monroe's public promiscuity. By the early 1960s, she wasn't just a movie star. She was a global obsession. Her every move made headlines. But behind the platinum curls and breathy voice was a woman who lived her love life in full view, scandalizing both fans and the press. Her relationships with Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller had already raised eyebrows, but it was her link to President John F. Kennedy that sent the gossip machine into overdrive. In May 1962, Monroe appeared at Madison Square Garden to sing "Happy Birthday" to JFK. She wore a skin-tight sheer dress covered in crystals, so revealing it made national news before she even opened her mouth. The performance was slow, sultry, and unmistakably intimate. Kennedy looked uncomfortable. Jackie stayed home. The clip ran on television, was printed in papers, and immediately sparked rumors of an affair. Neither Monroe nor JFK ever confirmed it, but insiders from White House aides to Monroe's friends claimed it had been going on for months. That same year, Monroe was also rumoredly to be linked to Robert F. Kennedy. The press didn't have hard proof, but whispers spread fast. Friends said she was spiraling, calling both brothers constantly, leaving drunken messages and feeling discarded. Her insecurities ran deep. Monroe had written about her childhood abuse and abandonment in private notebooks, later published posthumously. Biographers believe those early traumas left her craving attention and approval, especially from powerful men. She once told a friend, "I get scared they'll stop loving me if I don't give them what they want." In her final month, she was frequently seen with married men and openly discussed her loneliness. The tabloids called her reckless. Studio executives called her a liability. Her final film, Something's Gotta Give, was never completed. When she died in August 1962, the rumors didn't stop. They exploded. Speculation about her connections to the Kennedys and her personal diary fueled conspiracy theories that still circulate today. Marilyn never pretended to be pure. She flirted on camera, off camera, and in front of the entire country. That openness made her iconic and controversial. While others worked to keep secrets, Marilyn let the world watch. And they did, every single time. Born in Montana, cast as an Egyptian, fired for being too independent, praised by presidents, banned by fascists, and still, she never played the Hollywood game. This isn't the Myrna Loy your grandma told you about. Born into scandal and strangeness. She was born Myrna Adele Williams on the 2nd of August, 1905, in Helena, Montana. Her father, a successful real estate man and state legislator, was respected in town. Her mother, a trained pianist, had other plans. She wanted out. She didn't care much for Helena's social rules or dusty frontier politics. When Myrna was 13, her father died of the flu while traveling. It crushed the family. Her mother packed up Myrna and her younger brother and moved them to Los Angeles. Not for better schools or family. She moved for opportunity and freedom. They landed in the Baldwin Hills area. Money was tight. Myrna was quiet but observant. She liked reading, sketching, and dancing. She joined local theater groups and took ballet. While still in school, she began working at Grauman's Egyptian Theater, not as an actress, but as a silent, still dancer in elaborate Egyptian costume. She stood on pedestals before movies played, arms out, motionless, like a living statue. She was 18 when a photographer snapped her picture and passed it to a silent film casting director. The look got her in. She lied about her experience and said she could act. Her first few roles were background, maids, servants, and unnamed extras. She didn't speak a word on camera for years. Studios didn't see a leading lady. They saw something else. Her sharp cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes got her labeled as exotic. That word would follow her through more than a dozen films. She was cast as a gypsy, a Chinese mistress, a native princess, an Egyptian dancer, even a villainous seductress in fake brownface. It didn't matter that she was of Welsh and Scottish descent. The roles were all stereotypes, and she took what she was offered. By 1927, she had appeared in almost 30 films. No fanfare, no fame yet. Just a long list of names she didn't choose and roles she couldn't shape. But she was watching, learning. She didn't talk back yet, but she didn't forget. Myrna Loy was in Hollywood, and she was paying attention. From background to breakout. By the late 1920s, Myrna Loy was showing up in everything. She didn't turn roles down, she couldn't afford to. She had no agent, no protection, and no real power. In 1 year alone, she appeared in 13 films. Most were silent. Most were bad, but she was getting screen time, and that counted. In 1927, she was cast in Across the Pacific, playing a seductive spy. It wasn't a good role, but her screen presence stood out. That same year, she played a vamp in The Heart of Maryland and a native girl in The Jazz Singer, though the film is mostly remembered now for Al Jolson's blackface performance. Myrna had one line, barely lit. Still, she was there. She finally got a credit line in 1929, but that year also came with a challenge. Sound. Hollywood was panicking over the transition to talkies. Some stars couldn't handle the mic. Myrna wasn't one of them. Her voice, calm and low, translated well. She had a smooth rhythm, a clean delivery, nothing shrill or affected. Even with that advantage, the roles stayed the same. In the 1930s The Desert Song, she played yet another veiled beauty. That same year, she appeared in The Black Watch, Cock o' the Walk, and Bride of the Regiment, still boxed in by typecasting. One critic called her a reliable foreigner. But behind the scenes, Myrna was shifting. She started making friends with script supervisors, editors, makeup artists, and anyone who could help her understand how the business worked. She learned how lighting worked, how framing changed a performance. She studied everything. Then came The Animal Kingdom in 1932. It wasn't a big hit, but she played a modern woman, sharp, stylish, and grounded. No accent, no wig, no made-up nationality. And suddenly, producers noticed. That same year, she was cast in Love Me Tonight, opposite Maurice Chevalier. She played a proper French aristocrat, not a seductress, not a threat. For once, she got to be funny, confident, and in control. The Thin Man changed everything. In 1934, everything flipped. Myrna Loy was cast as Nora Charles in The Thin Man. It wasn't a leading role at first. MGM expected the movie to center on the detective, Nick Charles. But from the first scene, Loy stole it. She played Nora with wit, timing, and absolute control. She wasn't just the detective's wife, she was his equal. She drank martinis, cracked jokes, challenged suspects, and lit up the screen without even raising her voice. She made banter look easy. She'd never done comedy like this before. Director W.S. Van Dyke took a chance on her. He was known for shooting fast and loose, sometimes wrapping scenes in one take. Loy thrived in that energy. She didn't rehearse her chemistry with co-star William Powell, it just showed up. They were instantly electric. MGM didn't expect much from The Thin Man. It was a B picture with a modest budget, but it exploded. Audiences fell hard for the married couple who flirted like teenagers and solved murders between cocktails. Critics raved. Loy became an icon overnight. By the end of 1934, she was no longer the girl who played foreigners. She was Nora Charles, and she'd finally become something rare. A woman in film who was smart, funny, and still desirable. No costumes, no seduction plots, but just sharp writing and a sharp performance. MGM rushed to lock her into more films with Powell. They made 5 Thin Man sequels over the next 13 years. Off-screen, they weren't a couple, but their on-screen dynamic was so strong that fans constantly asked if they were married in real life. Quiet battles with the studio. Success didn't make her docile. If anything, it sharpened her resolve. After The Thin Man, MGM wanted to cash in fast. But Myrna Loy wasn't going to say yes to every script they threw at her. She read them carefully. If a character lacked depth or dignity, she passed. That didn't go over well. In 1937, she turned down several roles she found offensive or boring. MGM executives, furious, suspended her without pay. Loy didn't panic. She walked out. Quietly, without a press meltdown. She left Hollywood and, years later, started volunteering with the Red Cross instead. Fans were shocked. So were reporters. Loy didn't give statements. She let the studio sweat. It worked. Within months, MGM came back with a better deal. More control, more say in scripts, and the promise of better roles. She returned on her own terms and made Parnell with Clark Gable and Double Wedding with Powell. The message was clear. She wasn't disposable. Even while under contract, she refused to be treated like property. Studios at the time practically owned their actors, controlling public appearances, interviews, even romantic relationships. Loy said no to arranged dates, photo ops, and fake scandals. She didn't pose for pinups or leak stories to gossip columns. She never played the game. She also kept her political opinions quiet but firm. She was a Roosevelt Democrat in a very Republican town. She donated quietly, spoke cautiously, and never used her career to chase headlines. She played it smart, but she never played it safe. Other actresses noticed. Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, and Barbara Stanwyck all praised Loy's professionalism. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't scandalous, but she got what she wanted without burning bridges. Banned by Hitler himself. In the late 1930s, Myrna Loy wasn't just a movie star, she was a problem. For dictators, at least. While most Hollywood actors stayed quiet on global politics, Loy spoke out, loudly. In interviews and fundraisers, she criticized Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. She called fascism a threat to civilization and warned that Hollywood had a responsibility to say something. That didn't go unnoticed. In 1938, the Nazi government officially banned all of Myrna Loy's films in Germany. No Thin Man, no Test Pilot, no Libeled Lady. Her face was pulled from posters. Her name blacklisted. The reasoning? Too outspoken. The German press called her a bad influence. Loy didn't care. She took it as a compliment. She doubled down. During World War II, Loy turned down roles she felt undermined the war effort or American morale. Instead of playing on-screen heroes, she focused on real-world service. She refused to make movies while troops were dying overseas. From 1942 to 1945, she didn't appear in a single film. While other stars were on sound stages, Loy was visiting hospitals, writing letters to soldiers, and appearing at military bases, not as a character, but as herself. She used her fame as a tool, not for press, not for career gain, just to help. Hollywood quietly respected it, even if it didn't boost box office. MGM tried to lure her back during the war years with soft comedies and romance scripts. She said no, the work could wait. She wasn't trying to be a symbol. She just didn't believe in playing pretend while real people were dying. That's how she saw it. Years later, she said, "You couldn't be neutral. You were either against Hitler or you were for him." She stormed Washington, too. After the war, most stars returned to Hollywood. Myrna Loy didn't rush. She had other business in Washington. In 1946, President Truman appointed her to the U.S. National Commission for UNESCO, a post usually held by scholars or diplomats, not actors. But Loy wasn't just a face. She had spent years involved in global aid and education efforts during the war. Now she had a seat at the table. She wasn't there for photo ops. She attended real meetings, gave speeches, and wrote memos. In one memo to the White House, she warned that cultural recovery is as essential as economic aid. Her focus? Global literacy, women's education, and post-war rebuilding. This was uncharted territory for a Hollywood actress. Reporters didn't know what to make of it. She wore tailored suits, not gowns. She skipped red carpets and worked long hours without press coverage. One newspaper wrote, "Myrna Loy is acting like a real public servant." She was. In 1948, she joined the National Committee Against Discrimination in Housing. It was one of the first national civil rights groups to target housing segregation. At the time, that wasn't just unpopular, it was dangerous. But Loy didn't flinch. She gave speeches across the country calling redlining a moral failure and urging Congress to take action. She also met with civil rights leaders behind closed doors, offering her name, funding, and platform, but never making it about herself. Back in Hollywood, people asked if she was done with acting. She wasn't. She just wasn't done helping either. She balanced both worlds quietly, never using her activism to market her films. She refused the spotlight. While other stars chased magazine covers and gossip columns, she stayed quiet and in control. She didn't pose for pin-up spreads. She didn't do interviews unless she had something worth saying. And she didn't fake relationships to sell tickets. Studios hated it. In the 1930s and 40s, studio PR teams built entire careers on public image. They paired stars for publicity, leaked dating rumors, and staged photo shoots to make actors look more all-American or glamorous. Loy refused all of it. She never appeared in a scandal. Not once. There were no leaked affairs, no drunken brawls, no feuds with co-stars. But that didn't mean she was boring. It just meant she didn't let the public in. And people wanted in. She was known for being polite but direct. She answered questions with short, sharp replies. When asked how she avoided scandal, she said, "I mind my own business and other people's when it matters." She kept her personal life almost entirely off the record. No tours of her home. No stories about her childhood pets. Her image stayed clean because she guarded it fiercely. Even when she married 4 times, she didn't let the studios use it. Each marriage ended quietly, without headlines or drama. If reporters asked, she shut it down. This only made her more intriguing. Fans projected their own fantasies onto her. They imagined her as Nora Charles, witty, playful, madly in love. But Loy never confirmed or denied anything. She let them wonder. 4 marriages, no regrets. She got married 4 times. None of them lasted. She didn't hide it. She also didn't dwell on it. Her first marriage was in 1936 to producer Arthur Hornblow Jr. On paper, they looked like a power couple. In private, it was cold. They clashed over money, Loy's career, and how much space they needed. She left after 7 years, quietly. Her second husband was John Hertz Jr., heir to the yellow cab fortune. They married in 1942. It lasted less than 2 years. He wanted a wife who stayed home. She wasn't that woman. Her third husband, screenwriter Gene Markey, came next. That one barely made it a year. She later said, "I got married too often because I liked being in love. I got divorced because I also liked being alone." Her final marriage was to a UN diplomat, Howland Sargent. It seemed more stable until it wasn't. They split after 4 years. Loy never remarried. In interviews, she didn't pretend to be heartbroken or bitter. She just didn't want to settle. She often said that men wanted Nora Charles, not her. They loved the version of her from the screen. The clever, loyal, flirtatious wife who never raised her voice and always had a comeback. But that was a character. Loy was sharper, more private, and not willing to play a role off-screen. She never had children. People asked her why. She said she didn't feel the need to explain. By the 1950s, she had made peace with her choices. She wasn't trying to be an ideal woman. She was just trying to be honest. And sometimes, honesty meant walking away. While the press tried to turn her love life into gossip, she stayed ahead of it. No crying interviews, no public fights, just quiet exits and clean breaks. Hollywood tried to replace her. By the mid-1950s, Hollywood had changed, and not in her favor. Younger actresses were being groomed to replace the stars of the 1930s. Studios wanted fresh faces and bigger headlines. Myrna Loy didn't fit the new formula. She wasn't scandalous, she wasn't desperate, and she wasn't willing to beg for parts. After The Bachelor and The Bobby Soxer and Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House, offers slowed down, not because she lost her talent, because she aged. She was still in her 40s, still sharp, still bankable, but women in Hollywood had an expiration date, and hers had apparently passed. She refused to play mothers of grown men. She turned down scripts that treated her like background noise. She knew exactly what she brought to the screen, and she wasn't going to fake her way through a role just to stay visible. So she shifted. She started doing stage work in New York, live theater where talent, not youth, was the currency. She performed in Middle of the Night and The Country Girl. Critics praised her timing, her control, her presence. She didn't need a close-up to command a room. She also started speaking publicly about ageism. In 1955, she told a reporter, "Hollywood knows how to build a star. It still hasn't figured out how to keep one." She wasn't bitter. She just wasn't blind. Still, she made a few more films. In Cheaper by the Dozen and Bells on Their Toes, she played matriarchs, but not passive ones. Her characters had edge, opinion, and agency. If she had to age on screen, she'd do it with dignity. Even as her screen time faded, her influence didn't. Directors still called her the most professional woman in the business. Actresses still named her as a blueprint for how to survive Hollywood without losing yourself. She didn't chase relevance. She didn't panic. She just adjusted. Quietly, as always. She walked away without apology. By the 1960s, Myrna Loy had done what few actresses from her era could say. They retired without becoming a tabloid headline. She didn't make a big announcement. She didn't go on talk shows to explain herself. She just stopped showing up for casting calls. She didn't need to. She had made over 120 films. She had starred alongside William Powell, Clark Gable, Cary Grant, and Spencer Tracy. She had survived the silent era, conquered the studio system, and outlived the contracts meant to control her. She moved to New York and focused on activism, public service, and writing. She published her memoir, Being and Becoming, in 1987. It wasn't filled with Hollywood gossip. It was about identity, about what it meant to be watched, desired, ignored, and misunderstood all at once. In that book, she wrote, "I never had to play dumb. I just had to play it cool." That line summed her up better than any headline ever could. She still attended events when it mattered. She appeared at tributes, film preservation panels, and women's rights fundraisers. But she never tried to reclaim the spotlight. She didn't need to be remembered. She already was. In 1991, she received an honorary Academy Award for her lifetime of work. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. She didn't cry. She made a dry joke, thanked a few names, and walked off stage. Classic Loy. She passed away in 1993, quietly, at age 88. No scandal. No big final act. Just the end of a very long, very rare kind of career. Myrna Loy never gave Hollywood the version of her it wanted. She gave them the version she chose. She never posed half-naked, never leaked a romance, never faked a feud. She didn't have to. She built a legacy without chasing fame. She told off fascists, walked away from bad roles, outsmarted studio heads, and kept her private life exactly that, private. They called her the Queen of Hollywood. She never called herself anything. Because when you do things right, you don't have to explain. The year was 1943. A film sat locked in vaults too scandalous for theaters. At the center, a woman lying in hay rewriting what was allowed on screen. This wasn't Monroe or Gardner. It was Jane Russell, and her story only gets wilder from here. The bra that launched a legend. The Outlaw wasn't supposed to be a scandal. It was a low-budget Western by Howard Hughes, starring a newcomer named Jane Russell. But Hughes had something bigger in mind. He didn't just want a movie, he wanted shock value. Russell was only 21, with no major roles behind her. Hughes cast her as Rhea McDonald, a sultry saloon girl. During filming, he became obsessed with how her figure appeared on screen. Costumes didn't give him the look he wanted, so he built his own solution, a new kind of bra. Metal rods, wiring, and padding were sewn into a custom design meant to lift her bust unnaturally high. Hughes even filed a patent for it. Jane hated it. "That thing hurt like hell," she said years later. "I threw it in the trash and wore my own." Despite that, Hughes told the press she wore his invention. He wanted the story to spread, and it did. Then came the haystack photo. A publicity still showed Russell reclining in hay, blouse barely holding on. No moviegoers cared about the plot. They wanted to see that image. Theaters received angry letters. Religious groups protested. One censorship board called the photo morally dangerous. The production code refused to approve the movie. Hughes had a plan. He sent fake protest letters to theaters claiming outrage from concerned citizens. It worked. Curious crowds showed up in droves. The limited release in 1943 was chaos. In New York and Los Angeles, people lined up for blocks. In some cities, police were called to manage traffic. Chicago shut the film down mid-run. Jane Russell had barely opened her mouth on screen, but her image was already burned into American culture. The Outlaw didn't make her a star because of her acting. It made her a symbol of everything Hollywood was afraid to show. The full nationwide release didn't happen until 1946. By then, she didn't need it. She was already the most talked about woman in Hollywood. And she had done it without saying a word. Headlines, contracts, and control. After The Outlaw stirred controversy in 1943, Jane Russell's name never left the papers, but behind the headlines, she was caught in a mess of studio politics, lawsuits, and image control. She hadn't asked for any of it. Howard Hughes had her locked under an exclusive contract. That meant no other studio could touch her, and she couldn't choose her roles. She later said, "I was stuck doing whatever he wanted. I couldn't even accept better parts." For years, Hughes refused to loan her out, even when major studios begged. Warner Brothers, MGM, and Paramount all showed interest. Hughes said no. During that time, Jane wasn't making movies. Instead, she was doing press, magazine covers, pin-up shoots, public appearances. It was all meant to keep her famous without ever stepping on set. She became one of the most photographed women in America without releasing a single new film. Then came the court battles. Film censors still tried to block The Outlaw from playing nationwide. Hughes fought back with everything he had, lawyers, appeals, even threats to pull his other films from theaters. Jane stayed quiet in public but admitted later she hated the circus. "I wanted to act, not pose for ads." In 1946, the film finally got wide release. It made millions. Critics weren't kind. Most called the acting wooden and the story dull. But it didn't matter. People came to see her. Hughes had turned Jane into a brand, not an actress. Finally, in 1947, Jane got a new project, Young Widow. It was her first non-Hughes production. The script had depth, and she was eager to prove she could act. But the damage had been done. Audiences still saw her as the Hey Girl. Reviews were mixed. Some praised her presence. Others said she was stiff. She later admitted she was still learning. Still, she wasn't going away. The public had decided Jane Russell was worth watching, even if no one could agree on why. For better or worse, her image had already outgrown the screen. And Hughes? He still wasn't done pulling the strings. Jane versus Hollywood. By 1948, Jane Russell was trapped between fame and frustration. She was known everywhere, but barely working. Hughes continued to control her roles and turn down outside offers. She started to push back. Hughes offered her a part in The Paleface, a comedy western with Bob Hope. Jane didn't think she could do comedy, but she said yes just to get back in front of a camera. It turned out to be a smart move. The film was a hit. Audiences loved her timing, and critics admitted she held her own next to Hope. It was the first time she got to show range. But things weren't smooth behind the scenes. Jane had no power over her career choices. Hughes micromanaged every decision. He approved costumes, scripts, even haircuts. Jane called him obsessed with control. She began quietly asking her lawyers for a way out of the contract. Meanwhile, gossip columns tracked her every move. She was photographed constantly but rarely quoted. Journalists described her as cool, hard to read, and aloof. In truth, she was tired of being treated like a mannequin. Her public image was sex symbol. In private, she was religious, blunt, and preferred quiet. In 1949, she shot The Big Steal with Robert Mitchum. The production was rushed because Mitchum had just been arrested for marijuana possession. The studio needed good press fast. Jane agreed to the project on short notice. It was a basic crime story, but again, she handled it well. Mitchum later said, "Jane was tougher than anyone gave her credit for." She wanted more like that, less glamour, more grit. But Hughes still had her locked down. In 1950, she'd publicly clashed with studio heads over the roles she was being offered. She turned down several scripts and refused to pose for certain publicity shots. That made her difficult in Hollywood terms. Jane wasn't playing along anymore. She wanted to act, not sell, and slowly people were starting to listen. The pinup girl had found her voice, and she was just getting warmed up. Diamonds, Blondes, and a Stolen Show. In 1953, Jane Russell landed what should have been a supporting role. Instead, she nearly stole the film. The movie? Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Her co-star? Marilyn Monroe. Monroe played the sweet, flirty Lorelei. Jane played Dorothy, the sharp brunette who called the shots. On paper, Marilyn was the lead, but on screen, Jane dominated scene after scene. Her timing was cleaner. Her delivery was drier. Her attitude? Unshakable. Most people don't know this. Jane didn't want to do it at first. She thought the musical numbers were silly, but the studio pushed her in, and once filming started, she didn't hold back. She handled her own vocals, danced in heels, and rewrote parts of her dialogue. Monroe had more screen time, but Jane had more control. Crew members said Russell often calmed Marilyn down between takes. She reportedly helped block scenes and guided Monroe through complex shots. Then came the premiere drama. Here's the rumor. Monroe refused to attend the Blondes premiere in Hollywood, so Jane showed up alone and played both roles on the red carpet. She even signed Monroe's name for fans. Reporters called her a total pro and said she carried the night without breaking a sweat. The movie became a global hit. Jane's performance was praised for being grounded and funny, while Marilyn got the attention for her beauty. But behind the scenes, even executives said Jane held the film together. She never bragged about it. In interviews, she gave Monroe credit and avoided drama. But those who worked on the film knew the truth. Jane was the adult in the room. She showed up on time, knew her lines, and never cracked under pressure. That role cemented her as more than a body or a photo. She could act, she could command, and she could outshine a legend without even trying. Hollywood had underestimated her again, but this time everyone saw what she could really do, and Jane didn't need hay or headlines to prove it. The Hollywood Bowl baptism. In 1954, Jane Russell shocked fans again, but this time it had nothing to do with movies or costumes. She stepped into the waters of the Hollywood Bowl in front of thousands and got baptized. It wasn't a publicity stunt. Jane had always kept her faith private. She was raised in a deeply religious home and read the Bible daily. But the tension between her image and her values was growing. After years of posing in tight gowns and playing bombshell roles, she wanted to make a statement. That statement came during a Billy Graham revival event. The massive crowd watched as Jane walked into the water and was fully submerged. It made headlines the next morning. "Movie siren gets saved," one paper wrote. Others called it a mid-career pivot, but Jane didn't care. After that, she became more vocal about her beliefs. She gave interviews criticizing the moral direction of Hollywood. She said too many films celebrated sin and called some of her past work foolish. She even started a group called WAIF, World Adoption International Fund, combining her faith and advocacy. This turn confused people. She was still doing movies and still dressing glamorously, but now she was talking about Jesus on talk shows. Some fans loved it, others tuned out. The industry didn't know how to handle her shift. She didn't back down. In public speeches, she warned young actors to stay grounded and avoid the fast track to ruin. In private, she mentored struggling performers behind the scenes. But not everyone supported her. Some Hollywood insiders mocked her open faith. She was accused of being judgmental and old-fashioned. Producers called her unpredictable. Studios didn't know if she'd promote a film or preach at the premiere. Jane didn't care. She wasn't asking for approval anymore. The woman once labeled too hot for theaters was now talking about redemption and doing it on her own terms. And while the cameras rolled on others, Jane rewrote her own script in real life. Fight with the church. After several miscarriages, she decided to adopt, but adoption in the 1950s wasn't simple, especially across borders. Her first adopted son, Tommy, came from Ireland. The process took over a year. Jane grew frustrated with red tape and church politics. She believed too many kids were stuck in orphanages while paperwork dragged on. In interviews, she called the system heartless and said it cared more about rules than children. So she took matters into her own hands. In one case, she flew overseas, met with the child's caretakers, and returned with the baby before full approval. She claimed it was legal under emergency conditions. Authorities disagreed. The press labeled it baby smuggling. Jane called it saving a life. That incident pushed her to create WAIF, the World Adoption International Fund. It helped connect orphans with families worldwide. Jane used her fame to pressure lawmakers and raise money. She testified in front of Congress and worked with embassies to change regulations. But the backlash was real. Catholic leaders in Ireland accused her of undermining church-run orphanages. One priest called her reckless and self-righteous. Jane fired back, saying the church cared more about control than compassion. Despite the criticism, she expanded her work. WAIF helped place hundreds of children in homes during its peak. Jane personally reviewed applications and even helped pay travel costs for some families. She wasn't just a spokesperson, she was hands-on. This wasn't the Hollywood work people expected from a screen siren, but Jane didn't care about expectations. She said, "If I'd waited for the world's approval, I'd still be posing in hay." Her house in California became a hub for her causes. Her kids lived outside the spotlight, and she rarely talked about them publicly. But in her later interviews, she called them her greatest work. The roles in film paid the bills. The work in adoption, she said, saved her soul. Russell versus feminism. In an era when women's liberation was gaining momentum, Jane took the opposite path, and she made sure everyone knew it. She called second-wave feminism a mess of angry women yelling about problems they created. In one 1,973 interview, she said, "I don't know what they're fighting for. I never had to fight for anything." That quote alone set off a storm. Talk show hosts loved booking her. She clashed with feminist guests and stood her ground, even when audiences booed. She argued that women already had power but were wasting it on resentment. "I've worked with men my whole life," she said. "I never needed to burn my bra to get respect." Her words drew backlash. Gloria Steinem's supporters called her outdated. Some women's groups urged sponsors to drop her from endorsements. But Russell didn't flinch. She said modern feminists misunderstood strength. Strength isn't about shouting. It's about knowing who you are. She also attacked Hollywood for portraying women as helpless victims or hypersexualized cliches. Ironically, critics pointed out that her early roles did exactly that. Jane didn't deny it, but said the problem wasn't the image. It was the intention behind it. By this time, she was focused on her religious activism and charity work. But her conservative takes made headlines more than her advocacy. She called Roe v. Wade a mistake and said America needed less therapy and more churches. She wasn't trying to please anyone. The feminist movement saw her as a relic. Her fans saw her as fearless. Either way, she stayed visible. While other actresses her age faded quietly, Jane Russell kept showing up, louder, bolder, and completely unwilling to change. Love her or hate her, she refused to play the part anyone handed her. At 60 and still breaking rules. In the 1980s, most actresses from Jane Russell's era were long retired. Not Jane. At 60, she signed a national ad deal to model Playtex bras. The ads ran on television, in magazines, and in stores across America. Most women her age were expected to disappear from the spotlight, but Jane showed up in full glam, pitching support bras to real women. The tagline, "Does your bra have to show your age?" Jane didn't think so. Critics rolled their eyes. She didn't care. "I wore bras before most of these ad execs were born," she joked in an interview. "I know what works." And she meant it. The campaign was a hit. Sales spiked, especially among older women who saw her as relatable, not ridiculous. But this comeback wasn't just about ads. She started making more public appearances again. Church groups, charity galas, even morning talk shows. She wasn't doing movies, but she wasn't fading away either. She found a way to stay in front of the public without pretending to be younger than she was. And she wasn't afraid to call out ageism. When a reporter asked if she'd consider a comeback film, she replied, "Sure, if they let me play a 60-year-old woman who acts like one." She also joked that it was the first time in her life people cared about her comfort more than her figure. Back then, it was all underwire and pain. Now it's all soft cups and scents. Took long enough. The lingerie campaign made headlines, not for shock, but for surprise. No one expected Jane Russell, the once silent symbol of scandal, to become the face of grown-up confidence. She wasn't trying to seduce anymore. She was trying to relate. And that hit harder than any bombshell act ever could. In a business that tossed women aside after 40, Jane Russell didn't just refuse to disappear. She came back in a bra and reminded the world who she was. And she did it with a wink, not an apology. Outspoken, unfiltered, and unbothered. While most Golden Age stars slipped into quiet retirement, Jane cranked up the volume. She gave interviews that often went viral, at least by pre-internet standards. On one local television segment, she called modern movies trash with sound effects. She criticized rising stars for acting like victims instead of women. One host tried to steer her back to polite conversation. Jane doubled down. She also leaned harder into politics. She identified as a proud conservative, supported prayer in schools, and spoke at several Republican events. She criticized Hollywood's moral decay and said most actors today were spoiled and spineless. These statements didn't win her new fans, but they kept her in the press. In 1999, she made headlines again for all the wrong reasons. She was arrested for driving under the influence in California. Her blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit. At the time, she was in her late 70s. The tabloids pounced. "Busted bombshell," read one headline. She didn't deny it. She didn't spin it. And she definitely didn't apologize in public. Instead, she joked about it later, saying, "At my age, you're lucky to get a story printed about you, even if it's for drinking." Even when called out, she rarely backed down. In one interview, she admitted she didn't believe in political correctness. "I say what I mean, and if you don't like it, turn the channel." No apologies to the end. She passed away in 2011 at the age of 89. True to form, her final years were lived without filters, edits, or apologies. She spent her last decade mostly in Santa Maria, California, staying active in her church and speaking at local events. Neighbors described her as approachable but blunt. If you asked about her past, she'd answer, but she wouldn't sugarcoat it. She didn't do nostalgic interviews. She didn't attend retrospectives. When asked why she skipped award shows or tributes, she said, "I didn't go for applause when I was working. Why would I show up for it now?" In her final interviews, she remained firm in her views. She still rejected modern feminism, still criticized Hollywood's direction, and still defended her early work, even the parts people once called scandalous. "I gave the public what they wanted," she said, "and I did it on my own terms." She also spoke about faith until the end. Church was her real stage, and she liked it that way. She called it the only place that never asked me to be something else. When news of her death broke, the headlines were predictable. Most focused on the outlaw, the hay photo, and her body. Few highlighted her decades of charity work, her fights with censors, or the fact that she'd outlasted most of her peers. Her family didn't issue a long statement. They said she passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by loved ones. No funeral spectacle, no red carpet send-off. And that felt right, because Jane Russell never needed the spotlight. She was the kind of star who took it, then handed it back when she was done. No legacy spin, no last-minute reinvention, just one final act of doing exactly what she always had. Living loud, aging honestly, and refusing to ever play by someone else's script. One stare stopped a director cold. One scene made censors panic, and one decision nearly ended her career. Gene Simmons didn't hint. She exposed. This isn't your grandmother's Hollywood story. War-era debut with big impact. Gene Simmons was just 14 when she stepped onto a movie set for the first time. The film, Give Us the Moon. It was a light comedy, but casting directors noticed something deeper in her, a mix of innocence and edge that didn't feel rehearsed. By 1945, she landed a small role in Caesar and Cleopatra, acting opposite Vivien Leigh and Claude Rains. Jean had no formal training, but her eyes stole every frame. Even with just a few lines, critics pointed her out. One review said she had more presence than most stars twice her age. That attention didn't go unnoticed. Back in London, she was already becoming a studio favorite. Directors liked that she followed direction perfectly, but still added something of her own. No one could quite explain it. She was quiet, respectful, but then delivered a performance with a surprising heat that caught people off guard. During this time, Britain was still recovering from war. Rationing was in full swing. But Jean was getting fitted for costumes, stepping onto grand sets and showing up in magazines. For a country looking for escape, she became a symbol of post-war hope and a bit of fantasy. Producers began casting her in roles meant for older actresses. She had the look of a teenager, but the screen presence of a woman who'd lived through something. It made her unpredictable and hard to forget. The studios liked that, so did the public. What really set her apart, though, wasn't talent alone. It was how she made every close-up feel intimate. She didn't perform to the camera. She let the camera come to her. That kind of restraint, especially at 15, felt dangerous in the best way. Ophilia role that shocked all. At only 18, she was cast opposite Laurence Olivier, who also directed and starred as Hamlet. It was a bold choice. Some said she was too young, too unknown. But Olivier saw something in her others didn't. The moment the film premiered, critics couldn't stop talking. Her Ophilia was fragile but intense. The breakdown scene where she spirals into madness hit like a punch. She didn't scream or flail. She barely raised her voice, but her eyes, they told a story no one could look away from. One director on set said, "She didn't act the scene. She became it." That scene became one of the most talked about performances of the year. Some called it mesmerizing. Others said it was too much, too raw for such a young actress. The censors weren't thrilled either. They flagged her emotional scenes as too suggestive, even though she wasn't doing anything explicit. Just her face, sad, broken, and unfiltered, made people uncomfortable. Not because she did something wrong, but because she did it too well. Her performance earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. It was rare for a British actress that young to get that kind of recognition in Hollywood, but Jean made it look effortless. What no one saw, though, was how tightly controlled the set was. Olivier was known to push actors hard. Simmons was often left exhausted after long takes. Some scenes took over a dozen tries just to get the right version of her breakdown. She never complained. Hamlet didn't just boost her career. It showed the world she wasn't afraid of complex roles. She didn't need flashy lines or big gestures. She used silence, stillness, and just one look. This wasn't a breakout. This was a warning. Gene Simmons didn't just belong in movies. She could change how they felt. Barefoot and bold in Himalayas. Gene Simmons wasn't the lead in Black Narcissus, but she might as well have been. She played Kanchi, a teenage girl from the Himalayas. No lines, no backstory, just movement, emotion, and presence. And it was enough to shake audiences and critics. She wore a thin sari, little makeup, and walked barefoot in most scenes. Her performance wasn't subtle. It was bold, sensual, and totally silent. For someone trained in British restraint, she went the other way completely. Viewers couldn't believe it was the same girl from Hamlet. The censors? They freaked out. A British girl in brownface was already controversial, but it was her physicality, how she walked, how she looked at men, how she moved through space, that made it feel charged. Some scenes were almost cut. Critics didn't know whether to praise her or scold her. What made it even wilder? Jean was only 19. She wasn't experienced in dance or physical theater. She learned everything on the spot, guided by directors Powell and Pressburger. They told her, "Don't think, just feel." And she did. The result was magnetic. Behind the scenes, Simmons was nervous. She worried about looking ridiculous. She hated the heavy body makeup. But when she saw the final cut, she realized she'd done something rare. She made people watch without saying a word. Her performance added tension to a film already full of it. Nuns fighting desire, isolation in the mountains, repressed emotions ready to blow. Jean's character was the spark, the reminder that human want couldn't be hidden forever. She wasn't glamorized. She wasn't polished. She was raw and young and almost too real for the screen. Audiences either gasped or looked away. That role changed everything. From then on, casting directors saw her differently. She could play quiet, yes, but she could also play dangerous. Not loud or messy, but the kind of dangerous that sneaks up on you. Marriage that silenced her voice. She married Stuart Granger in 1950. On paper, it looked like a Hollywood love story. He was a big name. She was the rising star. The press called them elegant, glamorous, perfect. But the truth behind the curtain was less romantic and a lot more complicated. Granger was 16 years older. He was already famous when Jean met him on set. Their chemistry started fast. So did the control. Soon after the wedding, Granger took the reins. On decisions, on deals, even on what roles she took. The studios loved the image. They paraded the couple in magazines. But people close to Jean started noticing changes. She lost weight. She got quieter on set. Her fire was still there, but it felt dimmed. Granger didn't hide his jealousy. He hated how much attention Jean got. When she was offered lead roles, he often stepped in, saying the scripts weren't right for her. Some insiders say he even turned down roles on her behalf without telling her. Their marriage became a talking point, not for romance, but for the tension it created in her career. One studio exec said, "Jean was gold, but we couldn't get to her without going through Stewart." Still, she stayed, at least for a while. She did interviews with a smile. She played the devoted wife, but behind closed doors, she started pushing back. She wanted control over her own contracts. She wanted to work in America. Granger wasn't happy about it. The tension spilled into work. On the set of Young Bess, she reportedly clashed with crew members over last-minute changes made by Granger, who was constantly advising from behind the scenes. By the early 50s, it was clear this marriage wasn't boosting her career. It was stalling it, and Jean knew it. The girl who once shocked the screen in silence was now fighting to speak up off it. She sued Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes didn't hear no very often, but Jean Simmons gave it to him clear, firm, and without a pause. In 1951, she was under contract with the Rank organization in the UK, but Hughes wanted her for RKO in Hollywood, so he bought her contract. At first, it looked like a career jackpot. Bigger films, bigger budget, international stardom. But there was a catch. Hughes didn't want to make her a star. He wanted to own her. He sent her lavish gifts, jewelry, perfume, clothes. She sent them right back. He offered her roles, but only in projects he controlled. Scripts were delayed, promises were broken. Jean was stuck, contractually tied to RKO but barely working. Then came the final straw. Hughes tried to force her into a long-term extension. Jean said no. He pushed harder. She pushed back and sued him. That was a career gamble very few actresses would have dared to make, especially against a man with Hughes' power and reach. The court battle was ugly. She was accused of being ungrateful, difficult, spoiled, but she didn't flinch. Her attorney argued Hughes was deliberately obstructing her career, and he was. The judge sided with Jean. The court granted her the right to make one more film under RKO, but after that, she was free. That final film would be Angel Face. More on that next. The whole ordeal made headlines. Jean had taken on one of Hollywood's biggest moguls, and won. What made it wild wasn't just that she fought back, it was how calm she stayed doing it. No public outbursts, no gossip columns, just quiet, steady defiance. After the case, other actresses started to take note. Simmons had done what they were told was impossible. She stood up to the system without destroying herself in the process. Slip dress scene that stung. Angel Face was supposed to be just another noir, but Gene Simmons turned it into something unforgettable and nearly unwatchable for the censors. Directed by Otto Preminger, the film paired her with Robert Mitchum in a twisted love story full of mind games and manipulation. From her first scene, something felt off. In a good way, she wore a silk slip and moved through the frame like she knew exactly how much control she had. It was quiet, calculated, dangerous. Preminger pushed her hard. Some days she left set in tears. One scene, where she slaps Mitchum, turned chaotic. He slapped her back. For real. Not in the script. The camera kept rolling. That take made it into the final cut. The most talked about scene was filmed in her bedroom. Jean wore a skimpy nightgown that barely passed code. Her expression? Cold, unreadable, hypnotic. Studio executives tried to reshoot it. Preminger refused. Simmons never apologized. The scene stayed. Critics weren't sure what to make of her. One said she was too still, too unreadable. Another called her performance the quietest form of violence ever filmed. Audiences didn't know whether to root for her or run from her. That's exactly what Preminger wanted. Off-screen, Simmons kept it professional, but distant. She didn't like Preminger's style, but she respected the result. "It wasn't fun," she once said, but it worked. She knew what the role demanded, and she gave it, without blinking. Angel Face didn't do big box office, but it became a cult classic. Directors studied it, actresses copied her stillness, and fans replayed that one-bedroom scene like it was gospel. It proved she could lead a film, and terrify you doing it. This wasn't Gene Simmons the ingenue, this was Gene Simmons with teeth, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Backless photo stirred a storm. The robe was supposed to be a biblical epic, clean, reverent, traditional, but Gene Simmons made sure it came with a side of scandal, not because of anything in the script, but because of a single photograph. A promotional shot of Simmons in costume, barebacked, turned slightly, eyes locked on the lens, made its way into a national magazine. And suddenly people weren't talking about Roman history. They were talking about that image. She wasn't unclothed, but she didn't need to be. The curve of her back, the look on her face, it was suggestive without trying. It sparked a wave of backlash from conservative groups. Some theaters threatened to pull the film unless the image was censored. The studio quickly ordered retouched versions covering her back with added fabric. Simmons didn't protest. She also didn't apologize. What most people didn't know was that the robe marked the beginning of her freedom. It was her first film after winning her legal battle with Howard Hughes and RKO. No more interference, no more stalled scripts. She was finally in control of her career, or so she thought. Behind the scenes, she was still untangling contract fallout. Though legally free, industry politics meant many producers were hesitant to cast her right away. Her refusal to play by studio rules made her difficult. So even as the robe became a box office hit, Jean was still proving she was bankable and independent. She was also stepping into a new kind of role, the strong, morally complex woman. No longer the wide-eyed ingenue, she now played characters torn by faith, loyalty, and quiet desire. That's what made her stand out in the robe. While others delivered grand speeches, Jean did more with a glance or a pause. Staring down Spartacus with fire. By the mid-1950s, Gene Simmons had mastered the art of subtle danger. She didn't have to raise her voice or storm into a room to command attention. One stare from her could flip the energy of an entire scene, and nowhere was that more obvious than in Spartacus. She played Varinia, strong-willed, patient, deeply loving. But she wasn't just the love interest. She was the emotional core of the film, the quiet resistance behind Spartacus's rebellion. When Kirk Douglas's character meets her, she doesn't beg or flirt. She watches, she listens, and that look, equal parts softness and defiance, spoke volumes. The film was massive, huge budget, massive cast, but Simmons never got lost in the crowd. Even surrounded by warriors and senators, her presence held steady. One key scene in a bathhouse, fully clothed but emotionally bare, had audiences holding their breath. She wasn't there to seduce, but somehow she did. Director Stanley Kubrick said she could do more with silence than most actors could with 3 pages of dialogue. And that was true. She didn't rely on flashy performances. Her strength was restraint, holding back just enough to make viewers lean in. Her chemistry with Douglas was real, on screen at least. Off-screen, things were more tense. Douglas, ever the perfectionist, reportedly tried to direct her at times. Jean didn't bite. She followed Kubrick's lead and stuck to her style, one that didn't need constant rehearsal or rewrites, just space to breathe. What made Spartacus different was that it showed how far she had come. She was no longer being told how to act, dress, or behave. She chose this role, and she shaped it into something bigger than what was on the page. By now, Simmons had developed a signature move, holding the camera's gaze just a second too long. It was never overdone, just enough to make the audience shift in their seats. That was her gift. Making discomfort feel beautiful, making modesty feel provocative. Post-divorce roles, no apologies. When Jean Simmons divorced Stuart Granger in 1960, Hollywood expected her to fade into the background. Instead, she did the opposite. She stepped into some of the boldest roles of her career. She wasn't trying to shock anyone, but she was finally calling the shots. And the first move? Elmer Gantry. In the film, she played Sister Sharon Falconer, a preacher with power, mystery, and unshakable confidence. Opposite Burt Lancaster, Simmons didn't flinch. Their chemistry felt electric, even hostile at times. Her character wasn't there to be conquered. She had her own mission and her own secrets. The role marked a shift. This was Jean fully in control. No studio head pulling strings, no husband weighing in, and it showed. Critics called her performance chillingly calm and quietly commanding. Audiences saw a version of Simmons they hadn't before, fierce, focused, and completely in her element. After that, the walls came down. In interviews, she started to speak more candidly. She admitted how controlled her earlier career had been. She talked about being dressed like a doll, told where to sit, when to smile. "I wasn't rebellious," she said, "I just had a brain." She also started choosing roles that mirrored her real-life complexity. In Life at the Top, she played a woman trapped in a cold marriage, giving one of her most emotionally raw performances. Critics noted how much pain she conveyed without raising her voice. Simmons had always known how to make silence speak, but now it screamed. By 1964, she had officially left her ingenue past behind. Her new characters were layered, modern, and sometimes bitter, but never weak. Whether playing women burned by love or cornered by power, Simmons always brought a sharp, grounded realism. Her personal life, she kept it quiet, no tabloid stunts, just work, and that work spoke volumes. Jean Simmons had survived the studio system, defied Hollywood men, and walked away from a toxic marriage. What came next wasn't a comeback, it was her full arrival. TV role that changed everything. In 1983, when most of her peers had faded into cameos or early retirement, Jean Simmons made a move that surprised everyone. She went to television. And not just any TV role. She signed on for The Thornbirds, a sweeping, high-stakes miniseries that would become a cultural event. She played Fiona Cleary, the cold, emotionally distant matriarch of the family. It was a huge shift from the warm, gentle characters people associated with Simmons. Fiona wasn't cruel, but she wasn't loving either. She was closed off, wounded, and quietly ruthless. and Jean played her with absolute control. Audiences didn't just watch the Thornbirds, they devoured it. Nearly 100 million people tuned in. Simmons held her ground against heavy hitters like Richard Chamberlain and Barbara Stanwyck, and in some scenes she stole the spotlight entirely. It wasn't just the lines she delivered, it was how she sat, how she paused, how she looked away at just the right second. For that performance, she won the Emmy. But more than that, she won back visibility. She proved that actresses over 50 weren't just background players. They could lead, they could drive a story, and they could be just as bold, if not bolder, than they'd been decades earlier. Behind the scenes, Simmons was calm, professional, and laser-focused. Younger cast members described her as gracious but guarded. She wasn't there for gossip, she was there to work. One crew member recalled, "She'd walk onto set, say almost nothing, and nail it on the first take." That role capped off her transformation from teenage ingenue to Hollywood rebel, from silent power to full-on matriarch. She had nothing left to prove, but somehow still delivered performances that left audiences stunned. Jean Simmons didn't reinvent herself, she just kept showing up exactly as she was, smart, subtle, and impossible to ignore. And by the time the Thornbirds aired, one thing was clear. She never needed to scream to make the whole room gasp.